Please note, the guards have been removed from some of the machinery during the filming of this video. This is done for video purposes only. Always operate all machinery with guards in place. And remember to work safe. Thank you for watching. Hi, so I'm just finishing up the lathe work. We have all our shells done now, and we're ready to go on to the next step, which is going to be the router table to cut the bevel for the bearing edges. And remember, we cut all our edges flat on the lathe, and that will make our bearing edge. It's a homemade router table that I use. And I'm going to run the outside edge of all of the shells just to break the edge. And you'll notice here I'm using the reverse feed because the end grain has a tendency to tear out. So you have to make sure you keep down pressure on the shell, and it'll work out good. Make sure that the bit doesn't grab it and pull it. Make sure you're in control of the workpiece at all times. So I'll break the edge on all of the pieces. Just a slight bevel to the outside. Take the shell away from the router bit, so if I let it ride in one spot when I'm turning, it can leave a burn on the workpiece, and you don't want that. So always pull it away and start to recut. Close-up look at it there. You can see that I'm not taking much off. It's about a 16. I want to tear that end grain out. An important part of building the drum is cutting the bearing edges. Once I get done cutting the bevel on the outside of all of the shells, then I'll be ready to start doing the inside. And I'm going to raise the bit up. So it's taking more of a cut. So I'm not raising it very high. I'm taking light cuts off of this inside of the shell. Can't make it all in one pass. It takes multiple passes to cut the bevel on the inside. I'm still using the reverse feed, so I'm pushing down pretty good on the shell so that the router bit doesn't grab it and pull it out of my hand. But with the reverse feed you get a nice clean cut. just have to remember to be careful. So I'm going to do all the shells that way. You can see how I take it away from the bit, and if I hold it against the rotor bit, it'll leave a burn spot, which I don't want. So I just keep working my way around. Doing each drum before I raise the bit to take the next cut. It takes a bit of time. And just keep checking to see that it's a nice clean cut. And just raise the bit about a 16th each time. Close up a little bit there. The homemade rotor table. Now I'm going to adjust the height of the bit. I'm going to turn the rotor off just for safety reasons and raise the bit up and restart it. And then I'm going to cut all the shells again. The same reverse feed. You can see that I'm pushing down on the shell. That way I know it's safe. And I'm taking a very light cut, so it's not going to grab it. It's not going to grab the workpiece, but it's a light cut. And I just keep working that way until I get the double cut. And I leave about a 1/16 of an inch flat spot on the shell, which is the bearing edge. I'm also going to be sanding these edges as well. When I'm done on the rotor table, I'm going to remount them on the lathe, and I'm going to sand those bearing edges, the bevels for the bearing edges. The edge itself I will sand a little bit, but it takes a bit of sanding to do this. I start out with a 100 grit. Work my way down to a 220. I'll do all my shells the same way. And it comes up with a nice bevel there. Nice and clean. And it looks very good. Different grit. Keep working my way down. I'm just using my hand for it. Hold the paper. Break that outside edge a little bit, and you can see the small line, which is the bearing edge. I haven't started sanding the bearing edge yet. I only sand it with the finer papers. This system works pretty good, and you can do some nice work this way. Also get more use out of your lathe. So I just keep sanding to finer and finer grits. And I work my way down to a 220. And I'm sanding that bearing edge a little bit there now. See what that looks like. And now I'm doing the other edge now. I remounted the drum. So the scroll chuck system works out pretty nice for sanding too. And start out with 100 grit. And work my way down to finer grit. Just a bit of sanding to get the edge nice. Just keep working our way at it. The electrical bearing edge doesn't get all that much sanding. Just a little. I have to sand all my shells the same way. Before I move on to the next step, which will be cutting the snare beds. And you can see that's a pretty nice edge there now. Nice and clean. Pretty much as good as it gets. When I wanted cutting the snare beds, I used a plastic template to draw out on the front of the shell. You can see the line on the shell where the snare bed is going to be cut to. And I used a drum sander on the drill press. And I'm using my drilling jig as a sanding jig now. And I just clamp the shell right onto it. And I'm going to sand that edge. And I'm going to sand through the line. I don't want to take the line off, because then I won't know if I was taking too much of it. So when I'm done with sanding, there's still a pencil line on it. And I'll do both sides the same way. That's the template, now do I know. Or you can use a router table to do this. You have to make up a special jig for it. But if you're only making a couple of shells, a file would probably be the best way to go. Unless you have a sanding setup like I have for the drill press. It works out pretty good. It's a pretty coarse grit though, so it cuts quite quick. I'm just sanding through the line. And the drilling jig works out very good for this. Cut the snare bed at each shell now. Get them all done. They all need beds cut. So I used the template, held it against the shell. A little pencil line to show me where I'm going to cut my snare bed. The system works out pretty good. Once I get that done, I'm going to take a small sanding disc on a hand drill. I'll clamp the shell down to the bench. And I'm going to clean that snare bed up, because it was a pretty coarse grit on the drill press. so you can see how coarse that is. It's a rough cut. So I'm going to clean that up with the hand drill. Make sure you get the right angle happening. Sand that down so it's nice and clean. I'm not taking much off here. And I can feel that if there are any high spots, I can take them out. And then I'm going to break the edges a little bit with the drill. And so good. It breaks the edge nicely. Pretty much matches up the bevel for the very edge. There's still a bit of a high spot there. That's better. And I'm going to do the same thing for each shell. And you can actually cut your snare bit this way. If you have these drum sanders for your hand drill. Break that outside edge. Whoops. And then we're going to orbital sand that edge after. And you can see here, I've got the snare bits cut. You can see how the profile goes, and you can see how nice and clean I have it sanded out, and it looks as good as the rest of the edge. And I've done that with all my shells now. So once I have all of the snare bits cut, I'm ready to go on to the next step, which is going to be to orbital sand inside and the outside of the shell. Then I lay out my sanding discs. See the jig I made up for doing the sanding. I have a light mounted on it. And all the shells are ready to be sanded. I'm going to start with the 100 grit. And I'm going to sand the inside of this one first. So I got a small block in the center of the sander, you can see there, just to give it the shape of the inside of the shell. And I've got Velcro on the base of the sander, and I'm using the same discs that I use on the outside of the shell. And this takes a bit of work, but you can get a really clean finish this way. And I'm going to go through each grit from 100 down to 220. So you just have to keep working on it. the jig works out. And I'm going to sand all the insides. And I want to have the finish pretty much the same as the outside. Now if you don't get the inside as good as the outside, I wouldn't worry about it too much, because nobody's going to see the inside really anyway. But I try to get it as good as I can, which is pretty much the same as the outside. It takes a bit of work. So I'm working my way down, finer and finer grits. And with each finer grit, remove the sanding marks used with the coarser grit. So you can't miss any steps on this procedure. Now I'm going to wipe that down and see what it looks like. I pay pretty close attention to what I'm doing here, so if there's any marks that I don't like, I'll go back and sand again. And I'll just keep working on it until I get a good enough finish that I'm satisfied with. You have to be fussy with this kind of work. So now I'm ready to sand the outside. And I'm just using an older sander for this job. And it works out really good. I can take out any scratches left from the lathe. On the sanded the shell on the lathe. Remove any defects over the sanding. And I'm starting with a 100 grit, working all the way down to 220. And you can skip any steps here. Sand all of them with each grit. Be sure to wear a dust mask when you're doing this kind of work. It's very fine dust. Be careful with that. So I'll just keep sanding until I get the finish that I'm looking for. It pretty much has to be perfect. I can wipe it down and take a close look at it. And if I see anything I don't like, I'll resand it. And it's another shell, a different angle. See how much dust is coming off of that sander. You do your sanding outside as well, just to keep the dust down. Working my way down to about a 220 grit there. And it takes a lot of work to do these shells. And with the light I have mounted, I can take a real close look at that and see exactly what kind of a finished surface I have. And it's pretty much as good as you can get it. So I'm pretty happy with that. A bit more sanding on another shell. And the jig works out pretty good. You just keep turning the drum shell and keep sanding. And I'll just wipe each shell down as I go. I wipe it down between grits as well, in case there's any of the sanding grit left from the previous paper, which will leave scratch marks in the surface. And I would change grits there. And I'm down to 220 grit now to do the final sanding on that shell. I'll just give it a little wipe down. Make sure there's no coarse grits left. These from the previous sanding. Now I can do the final sanding on this shell with just the 220 grit paper. Just keep working away at it. Get those shells all nicely sanded. I'm checking, finally got a couple of gaps between the staves, just some small tiny spots. I'm going to put a little bit of glue on them. Just use a stick, put some glue on, work it into the groove. A little bit of yellow glue. Doing some touch-up work. And I'm doing this when I'm doing the orbital sanding, because I'm going to sand this after. First thing we're going to do is take a curved scraper, and I'm going to scrape off the excess glue. And this works out pretty good. The curved scrapers come in handy. I made them myself, so I just scrape that excess glue off of there, pretty much just leaving the glue in the groove, in the tiny space that I found. And you're pretty much always going to find stuff like that. So we'll go on to the next step on the next video.